You're listening to Breaking the Bottle Legacy with Molly Watts, episode 20. Hi, I'm Molly. After a lifetime living under the influence of family alcohol abuse, spending more than 30 years worrying about alcohol and my own drinking, believing I had an unbreakable daily drinking habit, I changed my relationship with alcohol forever. If you want to change your drinking habits, then Breaking the Bottle Legacy is for you. My goal is to help you create a peaceful relationship with alcohol, past, present, and future. Each week, I'll focus on real science and using your own brain to change your relationship with alcohol. Nothing has gone wrong. You're not broken. You're not sick. It's not your genes. And creating peace is possible. I'm here to help you do it. Let's start now. Well, hello and welcome or welcome back to Breaking the Bottle Legacy with me, your host, Molly Watts, coming to you from an absolutely glorious Oregon today. I'm telling you folks, you're going to get tired of hearing me say it if these sunny days continue because it's just beautiful in Oregon during this time of year, and I really encourage a trip to the Pacific Northwest if you haven't already been here. Today on the podcast, I am absolutely thrilled to be speaking to Dr. Reid Hester, Ph.D., who is the co-founder of Checkup and Choices and the director and senior scientist of its research division. Dr. Hester currently oversees research projects as well as ensuring the scientific accuracy of all their product-related materials. Checkup and Choices is a group of online programs for people with concerns about their alcohol and or drug use. And each program has evidence of effectiveness, and they are guided self-help programs that use state-of-the-art technology to help people decide whether to change and then how to be successful at it. So it's a great resource. Of course, I will link all of that in my show notes. And Dr. Hester just has a long history of research. He's been working in the field for over 40 years, published more than 60 papers, books, book chapters, and this is just the mission of his life. He is, unfortunately, I'm teasing. He is a graduate of his Ph.D. from Washington State University. He also has a degree from the University of Washington. So as an avid University of Oregon duck, he and I had to give each other a little bit of a hard time. That's why I said unfortunate. Just teasing, folks. Dr. Hester was kind enough to lend me his time, and I was very appreciative. I think you will really enjoy my conversation with Dr. Reid Hester. Hello, Reid. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on Breaking the Bottle Legacy with me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've just given kind of a shortened, abbreviated version of your credentials, which are a lot and many. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me more about the science of alcohol, and especially as it applies to people who are trying to moderate alcohol. I get a lot of questions from people about, like, what's true about alcohol? Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? Give me your scientific and tenured researched answer to, is there any benefit to drinking alcohol?
Well, this has been a topic of discussion and debate for decades now.
Right. Yeah.
In the alcohol field. And, people obviously come to it with their own biases. My take on it is that there's zero benefits from heavy drinking or binge drinking, and lots of downsides to that. With respect to moderate drinking, the picture is more mixed. Mm-hmm. Some studies have shown a positive benefits, while others conclude from their data that the long-term health benefits are just not worth it. So clearly we know that alcohol can disinhibit people, can loosen people up, help them adjust their attitude, elevate their mood, reduce anxiety, but and it is effective in small doses. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's the key, is right. In small doses.
Yep.
When you get above a blood alcohol concentration of about 0.05, those benefits start waning and going the other direction. So you end up with because alcohol is a depressant.
Right.
And it also can heavy drinking in particular can engender a lot of anxiety the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually talked about that quite a bit on the podcast. I've done a lot of research on that myself and experienced a lot of that myself as well. And it's very, especially in the last couple of years, as I greatly reduced the amount that I was drinking on a regular basis, then the experience of that anxiety post drinking became very pronounced, even with just a few drinks. I was very aware of it. And so I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I actually think I've said exactly those things before. So I'm glad that I'm doing it. I'm saying it correctly.
There's plenty of evidence that it interferes with your sleep too.
Yeah.
And the research on sleep is increasingly clear that it is an important part of both physical as well as mental health.
Mm-hmm.
People who are not getting quality sleep are putting themselves at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah, I actually just interviewed a well-known sleep doctor and had this very conversation, because sleep deprivation is so prevalent in the society today. And there's a lot of misconception from people who drink, that they believe that they have to have a drink to get to sleep. Like that's literally something they're thinking. And the science is just not there. It does help you. What I learned from him is that it will get you to sleep faster, but it disrupts your sleep patterns for the rest of the night.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, and that's just detrimental in so many ways. I mean, I was dumbfounded by how much sleep deprivation it affects your longevity. I mean, it affects everything. So it really is something that people need to be concerned with. I appreciate you saying that with alcohol, it's very small amounts, right? And I actually have been using the phrase around here. I say that I'm an alcohol minimalist, because I do, well, I think that that's really the kind of the mindset we have to take, because it's really, there isn't ever a time. And in fact, the NIAAA guidelines for drinking, they say that, or for drinking that's not going to be causing you disorders.
Low risk drinking.
Low risk. Thank you. Thank you. That women no more than 3 drinks in a day, but no more than 7 drinks in a week. And men no more than 4 in a day and no more than 14 in a week. But 3 drinks in a day is, for people that are drinking on a regular basis, they can get to 3 drinks pretty easily, especially if they're not aware of the alcohol content in the drinks that they're drinking.
Exactly. A Long Island iced tea has 4 standard drinks in it by most recipes.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly. And that's not, a lot of people are thinking I'm only having 1 drink, but they're not. They're having 4 from the get-go.
There was a great cartoon. I don't know if you remember Hagar, the old cartoon, Viking. And I can't find the cartoon anymore, but he had huge hands, and he'd tell the bartender, let me have a whiskey, and just have Sven pour 2 fingers, and he brings across this tumbler with 2 huge fingers, and the tumbler filled with whiskey.
Yeah, kind of the same theory, right?
Right.
So
now, the event, that's where the advantage of beer and wine come in that beer is typically in 12-ounce cans or bottles. Typically is about 5% alcohol, although the craft brewery can go up substantially from there. We actually have a list on our website of that you can search by alcohol content.
Wow.
And it'll tell you, what the various levels of alcohol and that's required on alcohol on wine and liquor, but not on beer.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing that you brought up, because I actually have talked about that too, because I'm an IPA drinker by choice. So, and IPAs can range anywhere from 7% on up to 10%, 11%, which really is so a 12-ounce can of beer is no longer just doesn't count as a standard drink. You have to pay attention to that. And I don't want to make it, and let's talk about that a little bit, because I say to people, I have created a peaceful relationship with alcohol, and we talk about having a healthy relationship, or what healthy drinking looks like. We don't want to drive people crazy with all these rules and, paying attention, but that's where I think the whole mindset of being minimalist or really understanding that you're just not going to be drinking that much if you want to include alcohol into your life in a healthy way.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just,
a healthy relationship involves not only drinking moderately, but not in response to negative emotions,
right.
anxiety, depression, worry, because as a alcohol is potent at briefly helping those, so it rewards your drinking. But it also tends to then affect your judgment, so that as you drink more, you're less able to say, I should really cut this out because it's not doing me any good.
Right.
People remember the initial positive benefits.
Yeah.
So small doses, that are not taken in response to negative emotions is probably the healthiest sort of relationship you can have with alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about that a lot too, is just the not buffering away or numbing away your emotions, because so many people get wrapped up into that, especially what started as a habit of just kind of taking the edge off every day, right? That kind of thing. Then it quickly evolved into drinking more and more, especially when I was having a negative emotion day. And so it's just really the only way to have any type of healthy, if you can call it healthy, because it's, of course, I say it, I know you would agree, the healthiest amount of alcohol for anybody is probably 0, period. I mean, there's just really no two ways about that. But if you're going to include alcohol in your life, you want to do it in the healthiest way possible. I want to talk to you a little bit about the disease model for alcoholism. Oh, goodness. Oh, if you all could see him, he's covering his face and shaking his head because, yeah, I know. Right. So I really do want to hear your perspective on it, because I know I have my own opinions on it. I didn't go into it in great detail with you, but my mother battled alcoholism for her whole life, and she ended up succumbing to that, but not until after her 80th birthday. So she was really hardcore. Tell me about your take on the disease model of alcoholism.
Well, my longtime co-author and colleague, Bill Miller, and I wrote a book chapter that was an introduction to a handbook of alcoholism treatment approaches that we first published back in the 90s. And then I think the last edition was in 2003. And in each of those, we started off with a chapter that talked about the various models that describe the phenomenon of alcohol misuse and heavy drinking and dependence. Excuse me. First, let me step back and say that the term alcoholism hasn't been in use in the medical field for decades now.
Right.
And we've even gotten away from the notion of abuse versus dependence, because there's a very large gray area in between the two of those. It's now considered alcohol use disorder,
right?
Which is much less stigmatizing. To get back to the models. How you think about the phenomenon of alcohol misuse really has a big impact on what you do about it. If you consider it a disease, then you're looking for medications to treat it.
Right.
If it's a moral failing, then you're looking to the clergy to help you with it. If it's a psychosocial phenomenon that has biological components as well as genetic components, then you need to take a much broader perspective, what they call biopsychosocial. Big word, but it has a biological component, it has a psychological component, and it has a social component. And that's really the model which is most inclusive and best describes how we can productively think about alcohol misuse.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned in that description, and I'm glad you did, because we're going there, genetics as being a component. So give me your impression or your decisions or your research on the alcoholic gene. Is there such a thing? And if so, okay, good, perfect.
The short answer is no.
Good. I'm so glad
we forward for decades.
I'm so glad. Again, we align on that. So, I've always come down on it and said, well, if there is something if you're genetically predisposed, it does not mean you're predestined and predetermined with alcohol. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
Nurture and
Your genes are
society.
not your destiny.
Yeah, exactly. And I truly believe, and I believe this about my mother too, and her father was an alcoholic. And so, somebody could make an argument, right, that there was some sort of genetic link between all of us. But what I think about for a lot of people that develop alcohol use disorder, or people that develop a physical dependence on it, which my mother was definitively physically dependent on alcohol. But she didn't start out that way. And she started out by same thing, drinking, and then drinking to numb emotions, drinking as a solution to get away from whatever she was feeling. And so I really believe that people have to focus on the why that they're drinking in the first place. Tackle the thoughts that they're having that are creating whatever feelings they're feeling that they're trying to get away from when they drink. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, in evidence-based protocols for helping people change their drinking, one aspect of that is to identify triggers to drinking or over drinking. And one aspect of those triggers are negative emotional states, hunger, anger, depression, anxiety, you name it.
Right.
So where was I going with that?
That's okay. We were talking about I was saying that I think that people, the whys behind people why they start to drink in the first place is what they need to tackle as opposed to.
Yeah. And really the triggers get to that because, people who have a long-standing habit of drinking too much, drinking heavily, they have an idea that, Friday, 5:00, if their cousin comes over, if they're upset with their spouse, they have an idea of what their triggers are. And what we try to do is to help them identify those triggers and then help them to consider the ways to deal with those triggers without drinking or without over drinking. That is really a key component of making change in the way that you have a relationship with alcohol.
So is a trigger and an urge the same thing?
Triggers can produce urges and cravings.
Right. Okay.
You look at the clock and say, gosh, it's 4:45. And you know that at come around 5:00, that's when you typically have your first drink. So noticing the time there is going, that's a trigger. And that can trigger an urge or in a more extreme sense, a craving. The cool things about urges and cravings is that they can't hurt you. Right. They can make you uncomfortable, but they can't hurt you. And a really important thing is that they fluctuate over time. And there are a variety of things you can do to reduce the intensity, duration, and impact of urges and cravings.
Yeah, that's kind of what I talk about, allowing urges and not trying to resist and fight against them, not trying to ignore them, distract yourself. I mean, these are strategies that you can employ, but once you really begin to understand that an urge cannot, they can't hurt you. They can't, it's a feeling. And if you really just allow it and you witness it, and one of the great things about the human brain is our ability to step outside ourselves and look at what we're doing, observe our own behavior. And so that whole idea that I think that you wrote about in an article, I think I talked to you briefly about studying the urge, about just understanding that urge process is something that evolves over time and that you can have control over and literally allow it to think yourself through it, kind of.
Yeah, we have. I've written a blog post about that on our website, checkupandchoices.com.
Yep.
And what you're describing there is a very helpful and appropriate strategy, but it's also a more advanced strategy.
Yeah.
For people who have much stronger urges and cravings, it's better for them to start off with the simpler ones, simpler strategies of distracting themselves, of delaying, deferring for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, of doing something more productive, more engaging than sitting around thinking about your desire to have a drink.
Right.
And coming back to that, then say, well, how is that now? It was a 6, now it's maybe a 3.
Yeah.
Or it was an 8, now it's a 5.
Yeah.
And then engaging in other strategies. Yes, the study allowing the urge to happen and just kind of riding it, because it's not a constant, it's not a constant phenomenon. It waxes and wanes.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about urge surfing,
Mm-hmm.
where you're going to be on the top of the wave, you're going to ride it down, and as you ride it down, the wave lessens its impact, but you're still moving along.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes in waves. If you're just sitting out there on your surfboard, the waves, the swells rise and fall, rise and fall.
So I appreciate this is just a great conversation. I could keep talking to you all day about all this stuff. One thing I want to touch on before we end our conversation is your thoughts on whether or not it's true. I say that we know that in certain 12-step programs, they will tell you that you're powerless and that alcohol holds all the power. And I full-heartedly do not believe that. I believe that people do have the power to control their relationship with alcohol. It does require intentional behavior. It requires learning. It requires a lot of it can require discipline. But the vast majority of people who are not physically dependent on alcohol, I believe, have the ability to do this with resources to create that relationship that they want with alcohol. Your thoughts?
Yes, that's absolutely true. We also know that the stronger the level of severity of your alcohol use disorder, the more likely you are to be successful at getting rid of your alcohol-related problems or minimizing them is by abstaining.
Right.
And interestingly, if we look at long-term outcomes from moderation training protocols, we find that a fair good size percentage of folks who are successful at cutting back on their drinking eventually stop entirely, just because it's no longer a big deal to them.
Right.
You can take it or leave it.
Right. And that's what I've always said I wanted is that's what I wanted to create for myself. That's what I have done is I wanted to never have to worry about alcohol anymore. I didn't want to think about it. I wanted it to be a non-issue, just like that, take it or leave it. And so I do believe that people can get there. One of the great resources, and we will link this, of course, in the show notes, is Checkups and Choices. And that's .com. Yeah, yes, I know. Checkupsandchoices.com. We will definitely link that in the show notes. Tell me a little bit about the program and the association with moderation management.
I was on the board of directors for moderation management for many years until, 10 or 15 years ago, when it just, I had too many other things going on. And it's always been an organization that has struggled because people get it. People, can learn the skills to moderate and cut back, and then they leave. And so they have always been kind of a struggling organization. And we have supported them with when they send referrals to us from them. But perhaps the most encouraging and uplifting mutual support group I have ever run into is Smart Recovery.
Yeah.
And while Smart Recovery has been abstinence focused, it's shifting away from that a little more now.
Nice.
And saying whenever you get to what's stopping for you is what's important. Because moderate drinking means stopping after 2 or 3 drinks. Abstaining means stopping after 0 drinks.
Right.
And it's my understanding that in the support meetings now, that if someone says, well, I did pretty well, I only had 2 drinks last night, people don't jump on him or her.
That's great.
They're supportive in saying, well, great. What strategies did you use to, essentially control yourself?
Right.
And it is the most upbeat, encouraging, and supportive group of people in recovery I've ever run into.
Nice. Yeah. I've
been in the field for 40 years now.
Right.
So
Right. I appreciate that because I actually Smart was a part of the information that I gathered while I was taking, and developing what I was doing, and agree with you in terms of, especially because they employ a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy in terms of their steps for recovery, and they do put the power into your own hands as opposed to some other, system or deity or whatever else that might be out there. They really do to uplift the individual. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And they're using empirically supported protocols that are adapted for use in mutual support groups.
Right.
And we actually collaborated with them when we developed our Checkup and Choices protocol for
Awesome.
abstaining.
Mm-hmm.
And I've known Tom Horvath for decades now, and he was one of the original. He and a few others, Joe Gerstein and Hank Robb, some of the original developers, and they're all very empirically oriented cognitive behavior therapists and psychiatrists.
The one thing that I want to talk, and like I said, we will wrap up. I promise. The thing that I struggle with smart recovery is the word recovery, because I think there's a lot of people that, like myself included, who I would have never wanted to say that I was in recovery, needed recovery, anything like that. In fact, anybody from the outside would have never known that I had a quote, that I was drinking as much as I was, or that I was racked with anxiety about it because of my alcoholic upbringing, right? I sat around worrying and Googling and looking all the time, like, is this, am I meeting the qualifications for alcohol use disorder?
Mm-hmm.
And I never, I never allowed myself, but still, I would have never. My mother was an alcoholic, so I had a very clear picture of what that looked like to me. And so I would have never sought recovery. And that's one of the things that I am wanting to make sure that people hear and understand, especially for like SMART, which is a fantastic program. People, you don't have to be at rock bottom, and you don't have to be, struggling mightily. There is room for improvement for many of us in our relationship with alcohol. And many people are drinking more than they probably should be, much more than those guidelines, those low risk guidelines that we talked about. And these support groups, whether it's SMART, moderation management, wherever it may be, can help you improve that relationship with alcohol.
Yeah, and let me just say that it's really unfortunate that recovery is a legacy of the old disease model of
Right.
alcoholism. If you're an alcoholic, you need to get into recovery.
Right.
And that's most unfortunate because it can prevent people from even looking at it or considering it. And I always like to encourage people to think about drinking and alcohol problems as on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
You can drink a little, you can drink a lot, you can have few alcohol problems, you can have a ton of alcohol problems.
Mm-hmm.
You can have minimal health consequences that can kill you. So it's not like pregnancy.
Right.
It's like hypertension.
Right.
And just because you're taking a medication to control your hypertension and losing weight so that it's under control doesn't mean that you're in recovery, but you're dealing with life as it comes to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I've talked to, Dr. David Nutt of UK expert. I know you know him. The notion of just knowing, just like your blood pressure, just like your these basic health things, you should also know how much you're drinking. I mean, it's kind of that way. You should keep it in a mindful way to be as healthy about it as possible. And it isn't like you're in for anyone. Now, there are people that, when you develop a physical dependence on alcohol, there are different protocols, different steps, different things that need to happen, but that you're still eventually going to have to deal with the psychological addiction and the psychological dependence on alcohol as well.
Yeah. And physical addiction is fairly rare.
Right.
If you look at the overall spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
it's very rare. I initially started working in an inpatient rehab hospital for alcohol. And those people were severely dependent. I mean, their detox was days long to get them weaned off alcohol, because it can kill you, stopping drinking suddenly when you're drinking a quart a day.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty small portion of the people who ought to be concerned about their drinking.
Right. Right. I think I think there's more people should be concerned about their drinking than just those people that are physically dependent. Because exactly. Those people, it really is. I think the statistic is less than 10%. It's narrow. And a lot of people who think they have a dependence on alcohol are probably not physically dependent, but they are most likely psychologically dependent. And that is the key. So Dr. Reid Hester, I appreciate you taking the time today so much. I will link everything in my show notes, your books and the checkupsandchoices.com, and anything else that you would like to add as we are leaving.
No, I just want to encourage people to consider that they can make changes in their lives, in their relationship to alcohol. And the best way to do that is to start taking a look at it and considering what their options are.
Yeah,
which is why we developed the program in the first place.
Yeah, and it's never too late. I'm
never too late.
I'm a person that had a 30+ year daily drinking habit, so I'm here to tell people you can do it.
So you started at 5?
Exactly. Dr. Hester, you're a doll. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and be well.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Breaking the Bottle Legacy. This podcast is dedicated to helping you change your drinking habits and to create a peaceful relationship with alcohol. Take something that you learned in today's episode and apply it to your life this week. Transformation is possible. You have the power to change your relationship with alcohol now. For more information, please visit me at www.mollywatts.com.